So last time you know mentioned something, it was in relation to, when we were talking about Kundalini practices and um, you know, other parts of Vedanta, um, that within certain stories, childhood stories and Hollywood and things, that there were often sort of esoteric, you know, hidden stories, within those things. And I just wondered if you could tell us more about that and give
Yeah.
us some examples as well.
So when you have a vision, when the vision is open, everything becomes sacred. When the veil is unveiled, the trees becomes sacred, the mountains become sacred, the oceans become sacred, the animals become sacred. And that's why if you look at the ancient cultures, all the cultures, they have sacred trees, and they had sacred animals, they have sacred rivers. So everything was a sacred, and even the stories, that fairy tales, were actually tales of the fairies, the mystics. Those Part of that story is in relation to this realm. A part of the story is in relation to the other realm. That's why the fairy, the in-between beings, who are available here and also available there. So fairies, mystics, sages. So like that, all over the world, once upon a time when man knew how to walk on earth. Now we don't know how to walk on earth. We are always looking up, thinking something from the above will come and grace us down. But once upon a time, humanity, all the ancient cultures, from the Celtic cultures to the Himalayan culture to the ancient Chinese culture and to the Native American cultures, all those cultures were very much connected to the earth. These cultures, they gave stories that were very earthly, but yet they had a very deep meaning, very mystical meaning. So every story uh, that was shared in the ancient traditions was in relation to inner awakening. And one such story, I think I mentioned last week, was the story of Cinderella. So, Cinderella, the word Kundalini, okay, comes from the word Kundi, and Kundi comes from the word Chandi. It is the same root word from which Cindy comes from. And Cindy Rela. Rela means to relay the story of Cindy. Cindy is Chandi. Chandi is the goddess of heat, goddess of fire, which the Tibetans call Tumo, you know. So the whole process of awakening of the Kundalini is explained in the story of Cinderella. And the Cinderella, she is the consciousness entrapped by ego, the stepmother. Consciousness wants to meet the beloved, wants to bloom, but she is stuck in the first chakra, constantly doing work, being forced to work. Survival is the main part of life. And the two sisters, Dukha and Sukha, happiness and misery, these are the two step sisters that someday we are being pulled this way, someday we are being impermanent. Happiness and impermanent misery is constantly disturbing us on the path, and the ego is constantly making us trapped in the lower nature or the first chakra. So but consciousness, Sindhi or Chandi, it is called. The word Chandi, the root word for this Chandi, comes from the word Cha Dandi. Cha means ecstasy, Dandi means the spine. So Cha Dandi or Sindhi means that which flows through the spine in ecstasy, which is the awakening of the Kundalini. So she longs to meet the beloved. She longs to meet, or if you want to take it from the yogic perspective, Shakti longs to be with Shiva. And the Cinderella longs, to bloom her full potential and meet the prince. So she gets in touch with a master, with a guide, that is the fairy. She comes into her life because she's constantly longing. So a seeker has to long. This gift, these tools, this grace. can only be received if there's a longing, constantly longing. You know that something higher is needed in my life. I'm not satisfied with what is happening with me. I'm not here just to survive, I'm here to bloom. So that longing, that vibration attracts a sage, attracts a guide, attracts a tool, attracts the dharma. So the fairy, a mystic, a guide, a teacher comes into her life, and the teacher gives her a vehicle, and the breath is the vehicle. And the breath, in front of the vehicle you have the horse, so she makes the mouse into the horse. So mouse is your lower nature, your shortcomings. The teacher teaches you how to make use of your own shortcomings. And the horses that is being led by the vehicle, the horses is the senses. In fact, in the yogic teachings it is mentioned that the senses, they ride on the vehicle of breath. So the senses guide the breath. So the vehicle is the breath, and the senses are the horses. So the dharma or the tool is you have to ride on your breath, and then you have to use the senses to lead the breath. So that is called the sadhana, practice. So the mystic, the fairy, gives her a practice, gives her a vehicle so she can ride on it and meet her beloved. So every day, Chandi sits, or Cindy sits in meditation, rides on her breath, and she's able to direct her senses. And on this specific day, when she goes beyond time, that is the 12 o'clock, the end of time. Okay, so now she's caught in time. But with the practice, she reaches the end of time, where time and space dissolves. In that end of time, 12 o'clock, she meets, around that time, she meets the beloved. And the Kundalini has been raised. Cindy, Chandi rises in no time, spaceless, timeless, beingness. And she reaches the 10th gate, the castle of the beloved, the castle of Shiva. And she meets Shiva, she dances with Shiva. So the lower nature, through the vehicle of breath and practice sadhana, is now in the house of Shiva, house of the beloved. And she dances, she works in ecstasy. But she cannot sustain herself in that state, and it happens. Your consciousness is raised and it drops. It rises, and it drops. This is the initial state of awakening. At times, you are in the state of ecstasy, and then suddenly you are back to where you were. And it's very disappointing. Again, you are caught up in the trap of ego and the dukkha and the sukha, the stepmother and the stepsisters. And again, you're back, you're working hard again. But you do not give up, because you have gone to the house of the beloved and you have left your imprint. And that is the shoe left behind. First, it's an effort, it's a path of effort. Constantly you're going. But then a time comes when you have left your imprint in the house of the beloved. And then you come down. Because you have left your imprint there, then even the beloved is alone without you. Then Shiva, the prince, grace. So first is effort. Then when you are caught in your lower nature again, then the grace, because you left an imprint. With that imprint, with the shoe, the beloved comes down and gets Chandi back up again, and they are in union. This is called the union of Shiva and Shakti, the union of yin and yang. So these are our inner stories. Although they are beautiful fairy tales, but they are more the tales of the mystics. And once you have that vision, once you have that vision, you can find the awakening, the story of awakening in every example and in every story around the world. So that is the awakening of Kundalini as described in the ancient Celtic sacred texts. So this story comes from the Celtic text. And Chandi or Cindy was a goddess, and Rela means to relay. So Cinderella means to relay the story of Cindy, which has its roots in Chandi, which means the goddess of heat, the goddess of awakening, that pure potential which is in there, everyone. But we get caught up in our lower nature, in the realm of survival. And until we do not meet a guide, until we do not have a tool, until we do not have sadhana, we are not able to awaken ourselves. So that is the story of Cinderella in relation to Kundalini awakening. And many other stories are there that also describes this awakening.